Okay, man. Okay, man. This is mostly just going to be a boring lecture on the 57th anniversary of the unwelcome assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. My name is Mac Crary. My grandfather, also Mac Crary, came from Dallas City, Iowa, where the Wallace Building is. You may or may not know that I claim to have come across the Texas school book at the University of Pittsburgh, which is known as Pitt, where it was planted by friends of Trump and Warhol. And I believe that it was created by Liverpool, where the Confederate Secret Service used to live. One of the things that really stands out in the school book, having read the book, is that it says, when talking about the murders of Martin Luther King and the indicators that the people who wrote the book arranged it, the Israeli scholar who's penning the screed for the powers that be, as they like to call themselves, says, I think God must be watching over me. What that means is there's a form of extrajudicial activity, sort of extrajudicial subculture who know all of the language codes. Back in Dallas, Texas, at the turn of the new year in 1963, the Carousel Club was open for business, which is where Jack Ruby came from. And what I propose to do is go through a number of exhibits that show some of the things that happen with this extrajudicial subculture, as well as talk a little bit about my own experiences with them. But the first thing I want to get past is the idea that my take on the subject is so taboo, no one's allowed to see it. You know, the inner light stands in the way, so to speak. And they have it all worked out to make it sound like I was brainwashed. And I have some memes that illustrate my thinking about what they've pulled at Carnegie Mellon University with the implant of the neuroplasm that left me deaf and under sort of subconscious controls for prompts of a linguistic nature. They made me into their slave golem robot for a while, tortured me and so forth. And this is considered extrajudicial subcultural activity, God watching over the flock, so to speak. You see, they cloak what happened in the radical business of sibling arrangement where everybody loves the Beatles and everybody believes John Lennon really died. He didn't pull a Houdini, they say, as I believe. But the medievals had a image, what they called the blue cloak of the deceived husband. And there was a lot of deception from women. Jackie Kennedy seems to have been one of the people who was in on what happened, and of course she left home afterwards. Now, I want to talk about these exhibits because one of my exhibition videos was taken down by YouTube for mysterious to me reasons. I accepted their decision because maybe with my explanation I can avoid the recriminations I got when I just presented the images. The whole thing scares me, certainly. When you look at someone like Sherry Angel, the Carousel Club, Texas showgirls, you're talking about an era of pornography and pimpery that's known as vintage. We're living through a geriatricide from these powers that be. They're making way for new blood and scrubbing the field of the vintage girls who they're finished with. I think we need to be clear that insensitivity, not love, is behind these activities. And the fact that they came from a Holocaust survivor crowd shows you that they are familiar with extreme situations. Very recently, somebody told me, well, anything you could say has already been said by somebody. So they see us as sort of Fluxus tapes that they go, yeah, sure, that's nice. And they don't really look after our interests, they just pretend to look after our interests. So the blue cloak of the deceived husband was in everything that Paul McCartney did to me, too. He wasn't in the least bit concerned about implicating himself by methods and the power and impunity of those methods because he has a fail-safe. He just says, well, John Lennon died. Now God is watching over you. One of the terms I learned when James W. Child in Bowling Green was living in the house of Judah Sellers, who was in this script, was escalation dominance. This extrajudicial subculture is their escalation dominance. And of course, it wasn't engineered by the eugenics of old Germany. It was more Henry Ford. It's inclusive. The blacks in power in the Union are part of this extrajudicial subculture. Now I want to show you an image of a girl who's from the archetypal mode, which is a term the Avengers of Liverpool, they're Axis Avengers, they're avenging the Duke of Windsor's friendship with Hitler, who was in Argentina when this tragedy struck in 1963. Archetypes are a form of eugenic thinking. King Crimson, who are involved in this, they've referred to Tamo de Jong's writings. They had a De Jong on Mount Desert Island when I was there, one of their escapades, as they called it. But she's from the archetypal mode of Gail Burston. This is from a film dramatizing Unit 731. She's about to be gassed. I may have pointed out that I was gassed in a place called King's Estate. And here's another Gail Burston archetype from a film by Ayn Rand, holding her ears, making her eyes look a little bit Asian, and says it would be like starting over. That's very interesting because not only because it's Fluxus repetition of John Lennon's stepping out final words, but because, and of course the similarity to Gail Burston, but also because Ayn Rand was the author of the book this movie was based on, and she, in her science fiction, liked to tell stories of making magic, powerful people disappear and then operating from the shadows as an extrajudicial subculture to take revenge. And of course, because they have these trumps, they can get away with quite a bit of jocularity and tweaking the shadows of suggestivity. You know, my full name is James MacRyland Crary, and they have encrypted their message board with what they have done and what they have threatened to do, and in whose name all of it is supposedly so good. This was one of their symbols. You know, I was gassed in a place called King's Estate. They used this for their pornography. So, I mean, you see, you know, they claim that I should have known, but if you notice the similarity between the Police Gazette and Jack Ruby, you know, they planted a sex bomb in the closet, so to speak. So they're parading that they pulled all of this. But they're cherry picking Ayn Rand. I mean, if you look at people from the archetypal mode of Galip Rosman, they are so-called chic at places like UW, but they don't bother really going. See, the thing is about status um, culture is that you're either in or out based on your beliefs about, you know, the interpretation that's the running scene of the people who are interpreting like a scholar like Ayn Rand, you know, or a writer like Ayn Rand. So, you know, it's money. They don't need, they're an extrajudicial subculture who work the secret casino, but they don't bother with the particulars. I mean, you're sort of out, they just cherry pick. Ayn Rand, for example, loathed Comprachos. She would have loathed what was done to me as a child, the brain damage and being impacted. But they don't care about that. They misconstrue her in their own way and then say that their loyalty to her is loyalty to them. But this is a page from um, the script, the Texas School Book, and this is a cover. You'll notice if you know Jennifer Rubin, who introduced me, who's the little circle introduced me to Gail Burstyn, who penned this. She looks a good deal like this, you know. Masako Shiono was one of the agents. They're called the Neva Corporation. They used a woman named Neva Mancine and put things like this in American publishing houses. So you see, you start to see what's going on with the people who pulled these crazy outrages and present them. Another look-alike of Gail Burstyn appears on Robert Fripp's record, God Save the Queen. I don't know what that means about to drop into that still pool, but that's a look-alike of Gail Burstyn too, you know, from the archetype from Timo de Jong scene. It's long been ignored, but the anniversary of Pearl Harbor was one of Lee Harvey Oswald's ID dates. So when we look at some of the things like that, the blue cloak of the deceived, of the deceivers have used, and try to see through them, you begin to realize that there's quite a menagerie of images and ideas coming from the thinking of the crown. Like the girl Rosemary Willis, who's standing there in Dealey Plaza in red and white. um, is wearing a Shinto shrine outfit from Japan. You know, I did a meme of Idi Amin and Brian Eno because they are the walrus. So you start to wonder, about some of the power structure that was being uploaded and rewarded as they were setting up things in Dealey Plaza. Like the Oswald Diary of Life has a Yoko O with a green bottle of some sort hiding her marriage hand that's standing in front of the globe. And of course we know Midori Goto was all virgin, marriage happy in the martial law, marital law structure of the Texas school book. Here I was raised under a picture of three Hitler-like nuns. So, what's going on with the blue cloak? Why do everybody subscribe to it and not question it? You have Dan Rather in Dealey Plaza saying exactly the opposite of what he saw in the film. Rather see the opposite of what is true. It's the idea, and of course, as I say, the girl Gail Burstyn is being used in the psychopathic images, and words like burst and people behind 911 certainly make a person a little bit jittery about Trump and his friends having the keys to the nuclear asylum, canceling all sorts of legitimate treaties against the use of such moronic things in a game of two virgin pussyball that involved these extrajudicial subculture letters that were sent to me with the ultimatum that Reagan didn't know, and you have this highly questionable identity structure coming both from Life magazine and from the IDs of Oswald. Strange names to attribute to these counterfeits. And of course, everybody knows a counterfeit is so much like Confederate. So when they had me in D.C. the day that Reagan claims he was shot, and he came out and waved to me, their attorney gave me a brochure reading there's no such thing as objective reality, only what the jury believes. Well, that's pretty strange, coming from Pentagon Disney. Obama is this lawyer's blurb. There's no such thing as objective reality, only what the jury believes. And he tells people what to believe. And so Obama is this blurb. And he's the salesman of this blurb. And to see what's going on with the incoming administration, we have to be willing to be aware of certain fundamentals involved in the society and company that we're keeping when we go along with this. The key word in that case is compliance. They want people to go along quietly with their plans and so forth. So we do know, however, that certain kinds of terroristic activities are involved in what they're doing. Like you could see what I looked like after I had been tortured by them. I looked like looked like a mummy. And exactly what I described happening to me is on the cover of one of the pornographic images. So, and yet they get away with, Obama gets away with calling me a liar. It's like a drone bot, like the Monty Python candy sales tape that plays on and on after the bomb goes off. You can buy some candy and popcorn, but you're a liar, you're a liar. And they have this book where the names Paul and Gail, Paul Twitchell, Letters to Gail, is in their publishing house system. And Twitch is like, lie detection. They were saying rapid eye movement, and Yoko screaming, you didn't have to tell a white lie and so forth. But clearly from the pictures and the records of where I talk about the promised land on an image of schizoid men, which the Watton makers played for me as a child, that the King Crimson experiment was very real. They gassed me in a place called King's Estate, and then they made a mockery of me. So, the suggestion that I've had of boycotting rock and roll over this is because they think what they're doing is so funny. But images like this are role reversal images, like the last scene of Von Ryan's Express. Charlie Chaplin made a film called The Great Dictator. The Eiffel Tower is a symbol of Hitler's occupation. That's why Trump said Paris was the capital of Germany when he first took office. So you have this system in place to make a mockery of our intelligence services and accept remote control by the adversary who played friendly while they defeated us from within. And they put out images, that more or less expressed why they deafened me and the deafening bomb blast and killed JFK and so forth. And the legacy of preparing for this and making light of what they were doing was written into what they were planning, pulled all along, Only the walrus wasn't Paul, the walrus was John, you see. He's the one who pulled the Houdini, the fake. And they put images of what they were planning, and with the archetype of Gail Burston again in Seattle. And Seattle has been central to the success of the plan behind the assassination of JFK. And those are two people who were near the limousine when the fatal activity took place. And getting the motorcade to go down that route was very important, and so it became one of the symbols that they used. Now, when we look at Wolfgang Stout, who made films with Joseph Goebbels and then worked with survival filmmakers after the war, you see that the wartime experience of extreme situations was going to be called upon. They were going to lull us to sleep and then poison us. Peter Gabriel has a scene in The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. He was involved in all of this and poisoning me. It starts off with sunshine in my stomach, and then he falls asleep and wakes up very violently ill. When they poisoned me with a nerve agent, I had been dating Diane Walls, and we were having a rough time, but I noticed I had a euphoric experience. And they were playing pool with a pinky ball, so the balls were flying everywhere. And I went into that horrible nightmare where I almost died, and they poisoned me and planted the nerve agent. In the Odessa file, it's coming over the radio that Kennedy has been shot, and the name Oswald morphs into Ronald. So it's easy to see what some of the hallucinophonic traffic is that's going on in this stuff, from Liverpool. And what kind of dare operation is involved. This was the image that got me banned. It's not a threat against McCartney. I'm simply showing people what has been going on. This person is supposedly defending the AIDS victims, but she was studying immunogenetics back in the 70s, and she had a namesake with a friend named Wolfgang, who called me on December 8th, 1980. If you look at my father's ship, you see a masquerade party they had. It was the same ship as Bush in the Navy. And then they raised me in Pittsburgh, where the Pirates were in Forbes Field. So, these were pretty hard rock people. And if you look at the suspect issues of Pentagon Disney, you notice that two men who look like Queen Elizabeth's cousin Richard are very close to the set. So, why are these images in place in these old movies to set it all up? One of the things we begin to see is that these patterns are very deliberate, because they planted a gold mine of information in Hollywood semiotics to be unearthed at a later date. Ian Watmaker, in fact, took me out to his garage to unearth old magazines from World War I and World War II. So they were setting it up for discovery. And when you hear the yada yada of New York City about all this, Spike Lee and Yusu Endor, and hear that Yagona Kabugi was around right before my father was done in, and we don't know who was put on his German Green Party obituary. That's what was on the back. Don't know who in German Green Party. Stuff about injecting people and all the other stuff about the injecting people holiday in Mount Desert Island. Elizabeth Manuel used to say, well, Bush must be sympathetic. He was a furious womanizer. I doubt he would. The point is that they're building a new racket of sympathy. So when you hear about these David Duke, Bobby Endo types who are all loyal to the ARC, it goes back to the days when black people served in the Confederate Army. Henry Ford was decorated by Adolf Hitler, but he also hired a lot of black people in the automobile union. So you may recall that I showed you an image of Marquis the Twain in the script. And the lookalikes of, excuse me, Elizabeth's cousin Richard. Well, the script talks about Mark. Mark Mancini, Mark David Chapman. And the Rand Club murdered a girl here over a penny before they poisoned me in the mouth, right? And they had to look, this is the guy who stabbed her, and this is the guy who was on hand to watch me and make sure I didn't get hyper. So you can see why I would make a meme of Peter Gabriel and Joseph Goebbels, because the extracurricular subculture, he also looks like John Schulman there, which is who he was working with, who was stealing books from the Carnegie, the Smithsonian caught him, is because the extrajudicial subculture consider themselves shamans. They were like, oh, well, let's squeeze the lemonade of pain from the queer bait and get a laugh. So when I say these aren't threats, they're just protesting the inhumanity of these people. I mean, there was never any truth in advertisement. I realize that's not very pleasant. I mean, but there's any truth in advertisement. You have a problem justifying what these people were doing. And far from being a threat, I think the real threat is suppression of the press. They killed Anna Politkovskaya in Russia at a very young age. And she was a mother. So you have certain kinds of research detectives who don't like the direction of thought that's involved. That's the problem. These are people who want to punish you for what you think, what's got into you. And I think the cruelty comes from them, not manifestly and obviously. But you do see that Hitler's cronies thought maybe Henry Ford was onto something in recruiting the Black Strong against the American weak. There's Laney with her pal in Gutendorf, in Africa. So the reason I'm showing these exhibits is that I think there's Hollywood backstab coming from the Axis, and that people are entitled to a defense of, that's Reagan putting a wreath of Bitburg-Belsen Gestapo cemetery, VNR planning pornography, like victory and revenge, virginity and rape, whatever, however you want to look at that. It's very suggestive, to say the least. And I always say, oh, well, Kennedy was a flirt, he was embarrassing the United States. This was in the Oswald life again. So they have their goal, which is to compliance from our society regarding these extracurricular outrages, extrajudicial plans that they've been executing with regard to the American franchise, where we don't just assassinate the president, and it was in the imagery of Friends of Lee Marvin in Japan, as they set it up to get them onto the street at, in Dealey Plaza, and when talking about the Odessa file, they were planning to sell it as a very hateful way to make money. And the presumption that these things aren't related is a mistake. It's just a mistake. You know, these things happen to be related. You know, enough research and confirmation is being shown you to see why I'm quite sure of that. So, when you look into the script, one of the things they already had decided was that I was going to be the odd man out. Only 2 people would know, it says. Only 2 people would know. Jiminy Queerball and Rango would, is what it says. So, they have these things, you know, 45 champ 63. 45 champ 63. So the champ got back in 63. Is what we're supposed to understand from that. The cell door opened, and that's all there is to it. They let him escape, in my view. So, you see that the crowd was getting it all ready, though, when they set this thing up, right? For Jimmy Donaldson, so to speak. And you find there are encryptions, even when you look frame by frame at reels. You don't see that when it goes by, but there's Reagan under the rather us U.S. swastika with Errol Flynn, a notorious traitor. You don't see that. It goes by too fast, but it's there on the screen. I looked at it frame by frame. Now, when you get into the, hidden aspects of, like, what you're allowed to think, that girl Di used to say, be careful what you think. Because what you think is always being watched by you-know-who. So, when you look at the Alfred Hitchcock elements that existed in Dealey Plaza, you see that it's story time for the killers. They have something they want to get recognition for their brilliancy. They are so brilliant. Such brilliant people. That Duke Edward, he was a real charmer. Yes, he was brilliant. How about that brilliant? Yeah. Oh, so brilliant. Why are they punishing me for showing you these images? Questioning what they mean. They say I'm threatening somebody. I'm not threatening anybody. I don't own any weapons. Where you get that I'm threatening anybody? And they make it out like, oh, the white is drooling. The white is drooling after the black man's porridge. It wants that hard-boiled egg. So we get even. We take his hard-boiled egg. Ha, 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 ha. It's really quite absurd, what people are capable of. We've seen this stuff before, rather us and Lazarus, I don't find the atmosphere that WQED cultivated around this case to be the least bit admirable, to be perfectly honest, But of course, the clowns who came in were carousel types. When I'm 64, they were the ones who were going to tell it like it is. People didn't want JFK. They wanted, they wanted the good guys, the ones who had sacred insight. And they were going to make it out like, oh, we were the ones who double-crossed them, right? When they're the ones who went along with the whole thing. They went along with the whole thing at Carnegie Mountain. So, you know, you can see why like they printed me in this thing, you know. And they're like, and you get saying, oh, well, our steam syndicate from extrajudicial, subcultural overlook at the Griffith Observatory. That's Rebel Without a Cause. You know, D.W. Griffith was one of the people who set the stage, the mindset for all this with the various adaptations that they engineered in Hollywood. So you see what they were planning from all of these references that they tally up in their imagery. There was even a namesake of this guy, Charles Bronson, in Dealey Plaza. They tally these things up to give what I call conveyance. It's the language and method of Dealey Plaza, you know, to conveyance what they're doing, you know, because what they want is to get across two virgins' pussy bowl in their conveyances and show that it'll be just like starting over because we're going to have to accept that Japan always gets revenge, you know. Japan always gets revenge. And this wasn't just Japan, of course. This was done in Pittsburgh. You know, the crowd around Masako Shiono and George Romero did this. You know, the Holocaust survivors. And so, I mean, when I say something like this, you know, it's because I see what they've done. You know, I don't think it's particularly fair to the people who've tried to live by responsible citizenship and government to just accept and go along with extrajudicial subcultures that come from people who are, after all, you know, foreign adversaries in hard drug culture who don't have our interests in least in mind. I mean, I don't want to wear you out with all of this stuff. I'm just making sure that there's nothing I haven't covered, you know. I think you should look into it yourself. I have a blog. I'll write down the address, but I can only pay for it monthly, you know, because you need to take a look at it fairly soon, you know. I'm getting to be an old man, and we're dealing with a relatively dire situation that could, I'm in a high-risk group for this COVID situation, but hopefully YouTube will take my word for it that I'm not trying to cause trouble, and I'm not threatening anybody. I'm just telling what happened, you know. And I certainly wish all of you the very best. You're in my prayers, and I don't think that the alliance on Mount Desert Island between Senegal and Will Zell, who praises Goebbels in this injection threat from Donald, should just be taken at face value as representing, anything but, at best, the Kabbalah. I think it's a green arc by people who don't really care about the environment but see our reasonable existential concern about the negligences involved in cheating us of ecology education and allowing this very sad mechanic activity from the hidden hand of so-called high command. We're not supposed to have a hidden hand, high command. My point is that God wasn't watching out over us on November 22nd, 1963. Some Axis regulars from Pentagon Disney think we will believe they were because of their pretty songs.